Ton, would you like to do the honors?
One moment. Hello, everyone. This is Sephardic World. We bring you weekly meetings about Sephardic history and genealogy. And as always, we are grateful to our patrons who make our work possible and who are watching this on Zoom. And we welcome them. And we welcome everyone watching on Facebook. Today, we have with us Hans Wallare. He is a young historian specializing in Jewish migration history. He is affiliated with the University of Amsterdam as a PhD candidate. He works with the project The Invention of the Refugee in Early Modern Europe. In his dissertation, which he is working on, he will examine the organization and forms of Jewish charity in the Dutch Republic and during various early modern Jewish refugee crises. He mainly focuses on Jewish history, transnationalism within Jewish societies, and Jewish migration patterns. Hans also studied at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and worked as a student assistant at the University of Manchester. And today he will talk about 14 petitions raised by the Portuguese Jews with various authorities in Holland. And he will talk about the self-image that comes from these petitions, and he will also talk about the reactions of these authorities to those petitions. I'm really looking forward to this, and I give the word to Hans.
I don't think I have to unmute, eh? Everybody hears me?
Yes.
Very good, very good. Now, it's very good to see that so many people are already interested in the history of the Sephardic Jews. That's very good to see. And thank you for inviting me to present my new paper, Without Jews, No Colonies, 17th century Jewish lobbying perspectives on their contributions in Dutch Brazil. And a special compliment to the organizers, Ton and David, who makes this all possible. Before I start, I have some short logistical notes. First, please let me know if you can't hear me properly or if my internet lags. I sometimes have problem with my Wi-Fi. So just raise your hand or do something. I'm happy to repeat myself if something is unclear. And my presentation will approximately take 25 to 30 minutes of your time. So that will give us enough time for questions and or a discussion. So as Ton already told you guys, that my paper I present today is a result of a case study within my PhD research, which is embedded in a larger Wiki project named The Invention of the Refugee in Early Modern Europe. So my overall project examines the Jewish refugee aid system in the Dutch Republic during international persecutions. By examining 4 different periods of Jewish persecution, I try to counter the historiographical perspective that Jewish charity was a local and introverted endeavor. Within each case study, I will ask the following questions. Who participated within the Jewish charity networks? To whom and how did the charity networks offer help for the Jewish refugees? And which forms of charity were finally offered to Jewish refugees in the Dutch Republic? And I hope to prove that the charity system for Jewish refugees developed to a transnational and cross-confessional system over time. So my first case study examines the initiated charity system during the Jewish persecution in Dutch Brazil, one of the first major Jewish persecutions in the early modern times. And it concludes that the Sephardic community in Amsterdam and the Jews in Brazil convinced various Dutch authorities to intervene and protect the persecuted Jews in Dutch Brazil. And when asking for help, they not only pointed to Jonathan Israel's often quoted economic role as poor Jews, but also emphasized other issues to which Jews in the Dutch colony contributed. So in today's paper, I will discuss some of the arguments that were used within the Jewish petitions as they can answer my main question of today: how did the 17th century Jews value their impact on the Dutch Empire and its colonies? So today's presentation consists of three parts. I will start by describing the period and the situation in which the petitions were written. Secondly, I will explain the different arguments within the petitions. I will show how each argument tells us more about the Jewish role and the contribution within the Dutch Empire and its colonies. And I will end by answering the important question of whether the mentioned Jewish contributions were also recognized outside the Jewish community. So in 1645, the Portuguese began to revolt in Dutch Brazil and subsequently start to persecute the approximately 1,000 to 1,450 Jews who live within the borders of the colony. The religious and geographical origins of the Jewish population were diverse. 25% of the Jews, around 250, were former New Christians who already lived in Brazil before the Dutch conquest of 1630. They moved in the 16th century from Portugal and Spain to Brazil as New Christians and reconverted to Judaism when the Dutch conquered Brazil. A second group, who arrived from Amsterdam, were partly born Jews and partly former New Christians. These former New Christians had originally fled from Portugal or Spain and reconverted to Judaism in Amsterdam before they arrived in Dutch Brazil. And the third group consisted of Ashkenazi Jews, originally coming from Hungary, Poland, and Germany. After fleeing to Amsterdam during the 30 Years' War, they moved on to Dutch Brazil as they heard about the many economic possibilities. So the first Portuguese guerrilla attacks started in June 1645. This directly resulted in the death of 2 Jews in Ipojuca and 3 Jews at the island of Itamaracá. And in the following months and years, many more Jews were murdered or sent to Lisbon, where they were put on trial by the Inquisition tribunals. However, although the entire Jewish population in Dutch Brazil was in danger during the violence of the riots, the Portuguese only sent the New Christians to Lisbon because they were considered apostates of the Christian religion. So immediately after the onset of the violence, Brazilian Jews asked for help from the leaders of the Jewish community in Amsterdam. The Jews in Amsterdam were, the Jews in Amsterdam were concerned about the fate of the Dutch Brazilian Jews, as the Jewish population in Recife, a city on the east coast of Brazil, had as many membership as that of the Amsterdam community. And besides the feared refugee crisis, many of the Jews in Dutch Brazil were close relatives of the Amsterdam Jews. So between 1645 and 1653, the Parnas, or the board of the Jewish community in Dutch Brazil, and the Parnas in Amsterdam were jointly to send 13 petitions to local and civic authorities in the Dutch Republic to demand intervention and stop the Jewish Inquisition and persecutions. However, even though the petitions were a collaborative endeavor, they were all written in the name of the Amsterdam Jewish community. I suggest that Jews try to increase the chance of success by using the famous name of the Jewish community in Amsterdam as the exordium. So, as you can see on my slide, 6 of the petitions were sent to the municipality of Amsterdam, 3 to the States General, 1 to the states of Holland and West Friesland, 1 to the Grand Pensionary, 1 to the stadtholder, and 1 to the consul in Portugal. And because the 30 petitions were used to convince different local and state authorities to protect the Jews in Dutch Brazil, the arguments within the petitions provide a glimpse of how Jews view their colonial contribution, or at least how they present their contribution to the outside non-Jewish world. So the following 7 clusters can therefore hopefully provide new ideas in historiographical discussion to what extent Jews had the impact on European empires and their colonies. So let's show you the arguments. So as a first argument, the Parnassine emphasized the Jews' economic contribution in Dutch Brazil. In as early as the year 1630, several Jews acquired important economic positions in the colony. This was partly due to the use of their extensive international trading networks, their knowledge of different languages, and their possession of large equities. So the Jews' economic status, the possession and influence of the Jews over land, labor, and capital in Dutch Brazil and Amsterdam was therefore cited multiple times. So a petition sent in 1650 provides a good example of how Jews validate their economic contributions in Dutch Brazil. The Parnassine predicted that Jewish persecution would lead to economic repression in Amsterdam. The Jews of Amsterdam, I quote, prospered in general with their handicrafts and commerce, but expulsion would cause important capital not to come home, unquote. So emphasizing the negative economic consequences when Jews had to flee Dutch Brazil was an understandable strategy. As the city of Amsterdam and other cities in the province of Holland benefited greatly from the Jewish trade with Dutch Brazil. On the one hand, the poor Jews in Dutch Brazil brought sugar and Brazilian wood to the province. And on the other hand, the Jews in Amsterdam were reliable and liquid buyers of goods from Brazil. Some researchers even claim that the so-called Golden Age was partly possible by the different groups of poor Jews in Amsterdam and Dutch Brazil. The Parnassine also emphasized the Jews' important contribution to the West Indian Company. They warned that Jewish persecution would lead to a fall in the price of the WIC stocks and consequently a loss of capital. For example, Jews wrote that the persecution would have, I quote, the implausible effects on a multitude of vessels of the countries concerning the great capitals we have brought into the company, unquote. So even though Jewish contribution only made up to 5% of total WIC investments, they argued that future Jewish persecution would lead to the downfall of the trade organization. Additionally, Jews assumed that Jewish persecution and expulsion would lead to the fall of the slave trade. Although the WIC still had a monopoly on the slave trade from Africa, between the years 1630 and 1645, Jews became increasingly active within the auctions and markets where slaves were traded. Immediately after the slaves were transported by the WIC from Africa to Dutch Brazil, Jews bought them and resold them to the highest bidder. And therefore, the Jewish agencies warned of a possible future slave revolt, as Jews, I quote, were important for regulating the right quantity of slaves in Dutch Brazil, unquote. As a second argument, Jewish agencies mentioned that future Jewish persecution and expulsion would mean the loss of the internationally admired, inclusive, and tolerant empire. During the economic and peaceful heydays in Dutch Brazil between 1629 and 1645, authorities tried to encourage Jewish migration to its colonies because they wanted to promote prosperity and resist Portuguese intervention. So, to excite as many Jews as possible to migrate, authorities promised to build an inclusive and tolerant empire that would provide a haven for all religions. For example, the authorities promised in 1630 that Portuguese, native Brazilians, and Jews would be protected and would be left to their liberty in the event of a possible conquest. And so, between 1645 and 1654, when the Jewish inhabitants were actually threatened by persecutions, the Jewish agencies wrote they were promised a tolerant and inclusive society as it was stated in the original Act of Safeguard and Privilege. So it was therefore expected, the Jews expected from the authorities that they would be protected in the freedom of conscience and everyone's paternal faith by sending new military troops to Dutch Brazil. As a third argument, Jews argued that the persecution and removal of Jews out of Dutch Brazil would endanger the future of the great Dutch Empire. As described earlier, the States General tried to encourage migration to its colony to keep it competitive with rival colonies, and because they believed a sizable population would lead to greater prosperity. And as a result, the Jewish community in Amsterdam wrote to the States General that the Jewish persecution in Brazil caused many people, read Jews here, to return home, in which they meant Amsterdam. And in 1652, Jews claimed that they were informed by the non-Jewish eldermen of the city of Pernambuco about the importance of Jewish contribution to the colony's social and economic prosperity. And again, in 1653, the Jews in Amsterdam wrote that if the authorities in the Republic did not act properly by sending new military troops, Jews would have to leave Dutch Brazil, which ultimately would lead to the diversion of habitats and the ruin of the land and the people. Fourth, Jews emphasized the importance of their military contributions. Firstly, Jewish agencies pointed to their contribution during the conquest of Portuguese Brazil in 1629. Research shows that many Jews joined the military campaign and that many new Christians joined the Dutch troops when they arrived with their ships in the Recife and Pernambuco. Taking this into account, Jewish agencies urged authorial intervention because the Portuguese were looking for the revenge on all Jews, as they were the reason why Brazil was not on their side. In other words, the Parnassem argued that Jews were punished because of their military loyalty to the Republic, wherefore they expected reciprocity from the authorities. And after 1645, Jews also started to emphasize their military loyalty during the siege of Dutch Brazil. Led by Johann Maurits van Nassau-Siegen in 1637, Jews were involved in its standing army protecting the Dutch colony. The historian Wiesnitzer even argues that Jews formed one of the four militia stated at the fortress Escubiae Judiorum. And this appears to be true, as the Jewish agencies argued that their community had been willing and vigilant in keeping watch for days and nights, being shot by the enemy, and therefore should be helped because the Brazilian Jews never defected as the soldiers of other nations. Fifth, due to the governmental instability and declining popularity of the Orange family and the overall dwindling support for the position of stadtholder within the Dutch Republic, Jews saw themselves as the protagonists and the protectors of the Orange family in and outside Dutch colonies. Without Jewish contributions, Jews believed that the Orange family would lose their governmental power to troublemakers. And therefore, Jewish agencies emphasized their so-called ancient loyalty in their demand for intervention. For example, they wrote in their petition to William II, the Prince of Orange, that Jews could only flourish because of the altruism of Your Highness, who has always protected us. And therefore, the agencies want to pray for his favor so that he would advocate the States General to send new troops to Dutch Brazil. In other words, what we see over here is that Jews believe that their orange-mindedness should be considered in a period of existing division between the Orange family and the pro-states of Holland. Sixth, the agencies presented Dutch Brazilian Jews as an important ally against the so-called cruel Spanish and Portuguese Catholics. And the explicit use of this enemy image construction can be explained by the fact that Portuguese persecution fit within the narratives of the Black Legend, a theorized historiographical tendency consisting of anti-Spanish and anti-Catholic propaganda. In the early modern period, Hollanders depicted the Spaniards and the Portuguese as cruel, fanatical, bloodthirsty, and intolerant. And the Parnassem displays the religious persecution within the existing patriotic anti-Spanish Portuguese discourse and tried to create a sense of us, the citizens of the Republic, against them, the cruel Spanish Portuguese. In different petitions, Jews emphasized that the authorities should rule in favor of the Jews because they together were fighting the cruel Portuguese. And that's also why the Jewish agencies wrote to the States General, "It's such an atrocious act that will surely bring all people, and in particular your noble one, to resentment. And this must move them to realize the terrible consequences for all of us." So, according to the Jews, the habits of the Spanish and Portuguese were not caused by the ethnic origin, but by their religion. The Jews therefore presented themselves as protectors of the two true religions, Judaism and Calvinism. The agencies mentioned that both religions believed in the importance of the Old Testament, which meant that they had to fight together against the doctrine of the heretics. And in another petition, the Jewish board wrote that the attack on Brazil was not the Portuguese king's idea, but that it was the Jesuits who created it. And the Jewish representatives knew that Catholics, and especially the Jesuits, were already viewed with suspicion and conspiracy theories, including the notion that the Pope's followers sought religious hegemony. And therefore, the Jews presented themselves as allies against the cruel Spanish, Portuguese Catholics. As a final argument, and it's always a tricky argument, but I still mention it here. As a final argument, Jews presented themselves as protectors of the pure race and color. If Jews were to be persecuted and expulsed out of Dutch Brazil, they warned that the Dutch would be left with slaves, mulattoes, people with mixed blood, and natives. And in this way, Jews responded to the early development in which the hierarchical order of people was decided by skin color and physique, and not as before by religion and the pure blood. And Jews approached this transition pragmatically by stating that Jews in Dutch Brazil were superior to people of darker color. The board of the Jewish community also wrote that Jews were of the same nature as the inhabitants of the Republic. In other words, they should be considered white and did not have the cursed Noah white identity and ancestry. And another clear example of how the racial argument was used can be seen in a petition sent to the consul in Portugal named Jacob van der Hove, in which the agencies asked for aid as they were of the same nature while others arrived from outside. So some of the mentioned Jewish arguments explicitly influence the authorial decision-making in the Dutch Republic. Official notes and resolutions, namely, mention similar arguments as an explanation for the authorial decision. This demonstrates that the mentioned Jewish contributions were also recognized outside the Jewish community. In some cases, resolutions explicitly referred to a Jewish petition as its main reason to intervene. For example, one of the resolutions mentioned that the Jewish request had been read out at the authorial meeting and that, as a result, they approved to write to the King of Portugal to stop Jewish persecutions. And in addition, an intercollegiate letter sent by the mayors of Amsterdam to the States General states that, due to the persistent and just presentation of the chief of the Jewish nation, the decision was made to help. So, a comparison between the so-called just presentation, so the arguments used within the petitions, and the arguments used within the authorial decisions, provides new insights into how authorities recognized the Jewish contribution. Firstly, Dutch authorities recognized that Jews were an important economic force in the Dutch Empire. For example, in 1646, the States General published a resolution wherein they stated that they want to intervene as they, the Jews, were important for the country's economy. I quote, "The Jewish nation is at the service of the country in general and in that of the West India Company in particular." Additionally, the policymakers mentioned that they want to help because Jews were important to the conservation and preservation of the conquest in Brazil, as the nation demonstrates its loyalty and its valor. And finally, Dutch authorities also mentioned existing international law, or volkenrecht as it is said in Dutch, which meant that Jews had equal conditions as the rest of the inhabitants in Dutch Brazil. They mentioned that Jewish persecution could not be tolerated, and so they needed special protection and safeguard to relieve them from all the violence and tension. So it's the same narrative as we also saw in the petitions. They just copied the same narrative in their own resolutions. It's very interesting to see. So I want to conclude by saying the following. I want to conclude by arguing how my insights contribute to the historiographical debate on the Jewish role and contributions in foreign colonies. If you ask the board of the Jewish community in Amsterdam and Dutch Brazil between 1645 and 1654, how do you, as a group, evaluate Jewish impact on a Dutch colony in Brazil? They would point to more than only their economic contribution within the Dutch economy. They would also point to their important role in the first standing army of the Dutch Republic. They would emphasize their role in protecting the legacy of the Orange family. And they would argue that they, together with the Dutch Protestants, were the defenders of the tolerant and just faith, as well as the protectors of the immaculate white race. So, according to the Jews themselves, they had a crucial and lasting impact on the Dutch Empire and its colonies. So, thank you for listening, and let's go to the questions.
Thank you very much. Would you like to close your PowerPoint? Great, excellent. First question that I have is why are they appealing to the Netherlands and not to the governor?
To the government in Dutch Brazil?
Presumably there was a Dutch governor in Pernambuco. Why are they going over his head, or what's
that's a very good question. So all the decisions that had to be made were first by the States General and the WIC. They had really the power to change something, also to write letters to Portugal. So all the international decisions had to be made had to be approved by the States General. That was just a decision that was really into policy of the Dutch authorities in the Dutch Republic. And that's where every international decision had to be made. Was it Christian? Was it Protestant? Was it say something? Everything has to go first to the States General.
Okay, thank you. I saw Kevin made a comment about the situation in New Amsterdam. Are these two communities making the same sort of arguments?
That's a very lovely question. I also looked into that because what you see when in 1654, when the Jews have to leave Dutch Brazil, is that there is like a very big problem. Okay, where are we going now? A lot of Jews are going to Amsterdam. There are some Jews who are trying to go to New Amsterdam, what's now New York. There are some ships. There's a story, if you like to read about it, it's Wittnitzer also writing about it. There are some ships and they come into a storm and they land in Martinique instead of New Amsterdam. And the Ashkenazi Jews can continue, and the New Christians have to go to the Inquisition tribunals because Martinique in that time was not safe for Jews. So the Ashkenazi Jews were the first one who went to New Amsterdam. We had Stuyvesant in New Amsterdam at that moment. What the Jews in Amsterdam tried to do is opening also the borders for Sephardic Jews at that moment. So they're also writing petitions to New Amsterdam. And we see the same arguments that they used in Dutch Brazil also sending to New Amsterdam. So they say, we're very important for the migration. If you want people, when you want to colonize New Amsterdam, you need the Jews. If you see that we're very important as an economic force, so send us and we will make sure that the economy in New Amsterdam will be great. So you see really the same narrative, the same discourse in New Amsterdam also in the petitions. Yeah, very interesting.
Thank you. Ton.
You mentioned that there were some 250 conversos present at the time of the Dutch invasion into Brazil. I was wondering where that number comes from.
Yeah, that's also Wiesnitzer. I have a lot about Wiesnitzer. He's a historian that wrote a lot about Dutch Brazil. And he wrote indeed in one of his articles that he thought there were 250 new Christians already living in Dutch Brazil when they arrived, when the Dutch arrived with their ships. But I didn't figure it out myself. I really have it from the literature. Yeah.
Can you put his name in chat? Because,
definitely, and I can also, if somebody wants the article, I can also send that.
Okay, I would want it.
Definitely, definitely.
And these conversos, did he join the Portuguese Jews, or were they hesitant to do so, or did they only do that partially, or?
That's also very mixed. What we see is some Jews indeed choose to join the Dutch troops when they arrive with their ship, but there are also a lot who join the Portuguese. So they leave Dutch Brazil at that moment, and when the Portuguese are taking it over again, they also move it back to Portuguese Brazil in 1654. But these are really people who really believed in Catholicism at that moment. They were really converted. And they left with the Portuguese, so no, they didn't join. Really, the new Christians who still had like a Jewish background and still believe in Judaism joined the Dutch troops, or who saw that there were a lot of economic chances. There are definitely also a lot of people. Yeah, but no, not everybody joined the Dutch troop. If that's your question, there were a lot of people also joined the Portuguese and left the area at that moment.
Inevitably, there's a question about the racial argument. And the question about that asks if there was a debate under Jewish colonists themselves about whether to use that argument. In other words, was there opposition to using this argument?
I love that question. I didn't see any other opinion than what I read, but it's also because I read like the petitions from Parnassima, from the boards, like general members. Yeah, they had probably also discussion with each other, but you really see that the Parnassim really had a lead in this one. So they also really thought about the arguments. If there were other people who thought differently, probably yes, but I didn't find those sources. But yeah, there were like the Bartholomeus, all those people already thought in the 17th century, yeah, can we use that argument? Is slavery, can we use black people as slaves? That argument was already in the 17th century developing, like, oh, we can't do that because everybody is a human being. But probably also in the Jewish community, yeah. But I don't have any proof who wrote about this. No, I don't know.
Did Curaçao already play any role in this period?
Yes, there were a lot of Jews who left from Dutch Brazil to Curaçao at that moment that I read, but I didn't look particularly to Curaçao, what happened over there at that moment. But there's a lot of literature about that, definitely, yeah. Mm-hmm. But I can't answer the question. If you have really specific questions about Curaçao, about the colony itself at that moment, I don't know. I only know that a lot of Dutch Brazilian Jews left to Curaçao.
Mm-hmm. On YouTube, we also have a question about Angola, if you know about sort of connections there.
Then I have to ask you guys. Maybe you guys know that. I really focus on Dutch Brazil, so I don't know a lot about the.
Can you tell us a little bit about the archives of the West Indian Company? Because you mentioned, for example, Jewish soldiers. Are there going to be names in payroll archives, and are there going to be names of and details of merchants and so forth?
Yes, please. If somebody is very interested in this and write an article about this, there are a lot of sources about names and who was on the payroll from the WIC. There were a lot of Jews, but also non-Jews who asked after 1654, yeah, we still got paid, we still need our paycheck. And they write also letters to the WIC with names and how much they get. So there's still a lot of information and there's still a lot of questions about this. So I can only say, like, listen, go into those archives. You can find those archives in the National Archive in Holland, in the Netherlands, in The Hague. So there's still to uncover about this. Yeah, definitely.
Are they digitized?
They're digitized. Yeah.
Wonderful.
They're digitized. So people, please. I have to finish my PhD, so I don't have any time to figure out this. But there's still a lot of interesting things to find. definitely.
Yes, and they are online on the website of the National Archives of the Netherlands.
Yeah, and during Corona time, they just digitized so many records. So yeah, no, there's a lot of
yes. Also available are records from the States General concerning the West Indian Company, and which before 1654 related to Brazil, and after that to the colonies on Curaçao and in New York and elsewhere. Suriname.
Yeah. To elaborate on that, you can imagine in 1654 it was a very big refugee crisis in that time. You understand also today when there's a refugee crisis, a lot of things need to happen before you can move from one place to another. And Jews had also this problem in 1654. So they needed boats, they needed food for on the boats, etc. And all in the WIC records, they asked the WIC, oh, we need this food, we need the boats. So you can also find all those information in those records. So the flea, you know, how they organize a refuge. You can also find in the records. It's also very interesting to read.
Did the petitions, did they go direct to the government, or did they go through the Amsterdam community who would then rewrite it or reinterpret it?
Oh no, this is all from the Amsterdam community, the Jewish Sephardic Amsterdam community to the State General. Yeah.
Yeah. And as somebody who is not Dutch, but I'm vaguely aware, and you talked about the differences between the Orangists and the States General of Holland, and I do remember reading something about the Dutch, the States General leader De Witt having his arm eaten or something at some point. Can you sort of just give us a little bit of information about this? I mean, were they, and also were they talking to the Orangists because the Orangists had the power, or they were just on their side, or what? Sorry, it's a huge question, but.
Yeah, it's a very big question. There are 2 times that there is no stadholder in the Netherlands. Stadhouderloos tijdperk. So there are 2 periods that there is really no Orange family who's ruling in the Dutch Republic, and they're like more like a grand pensionary or somebody from the States of Holland. Think about the De Witt family, family De Witt, that is very famous over here, who was killed by an angry mob because they were for the Orange. So you see all the time that there is a sort of, do we need somebody who is born into the position, like an Orange family, who has inherited his status, or do we have to find somebody who is more qualified because, you know, he proved that he is in the position and he can organize something. And that tension is also nowadays is still like a sort of tension, but also during that time that people thought, can you put somebody in that position that inherited it? Yeah, but, so that's a sort of where this ideas is coming from the Orange family and the Pro-States of Holland.
But in terms of dealing with Portugal, presumably they all took the same line, or not?
Ooh, I don't know completely how they thought about Portugal. Both. I can only tell you where that's coming from. Why the Jews always chose for the Orange family, and that Bart Vallet, also a Dutch historian, wrote like recently a book about this, about really the ancient. He calls it the ancient sort of connection between the Orange family and Jews in Amsterdam, and it's because. Yeah, how do you say that? You have to gamble on one person sometimes. You have to really support somebody. You can't switch all the time. And they thought, okay, you know, the Orange family is a pretty good connection that we can have over here. So they really put all their money on the Orange family all the time, and also use it in the arguments. Yeah, they were afraid that if they didn't do that, and the Orange family would come in power again, that they would lose everything.
But they didn't.
Sort of security.
Bruce Kahan asks, why did you decide on this PhD topic?
It's also a very good question. All good questions. No, it's also a very broad question because in Holland over here we have a PhD system that you are working in a project. So I'm with 3 other PhD students. One is looking to Moriscos, also from Portugal and Spain, and how they organized the charity and where they fled to and how the charity was organized there. And I'm then the Jewish compartment. So I'm looking into the Jews and how they organized their charity. And I chose the Sephardic Dutch, because the Sephardic Dutch, everybody knows that there was a very famous and very well organized, relatively organized community. So if somebody had it organized, it was or Venice or Amsterdam. And because my Italian is not that good, so if I have to read petitions to the Italian Republic, I can't read it. So that's why I chose Dutch. So it was more pragmatic. Yeah, and I can elaborate also a little. I have time, so let me elaborate on that. So my main question for my PhD is the following. Everybody knows the sort of humanitarian ideas that pop up during the Enlightenment. So during the Enlightenment, we see a sort of, we have to help refugees because they are human beings. And I think this idea, this concept of humanitarianism that we also see, for example, today with Afghan refugees, we have to help them because they're human beings, is not something from the Enlightenment, but I think it's already something from the 17th century, and that the refugees brought this idea with them. They said, we are human beings, so we have to be helped. So I'm looking to this sort of narrative in those petitions, but also in a sort of community resolutions that they wrote together. I'm sort of searching for this narrative. So like, we're not Jews, but we are more human beings who need to be helped. And that's a sort of main question of my whole project. And I'm looking to 4 different persecutions in the early modern period. And I look, or this sort of idea flows a little into this period, and or I see also a sort of changing narrative. I hope everybody understands that. It's a sort of fake sometimes, yeah.
Daniela Weil would love to have the link to the petition, that states the racial argument. So
Definitely.
If you can send it to us, then we can send it on to Daniela. And then there's an interesting question from René Levi Maduro. Could you please provide sources which state that Curaçao was one of the destinations of the Jewish colonists in Brazil? Because to the best of our knowledge, there's no evidence that Brazilian Jews settled in Curaçao after the Brazilian expulsion.
Definitely, I don't completely know. I have a lot of maps, so I have to figure out where I read this, where I have this from, but I will send it if I found it. Definitely, no problem.
Well, I think there wasn't a direct migration from Brazil to Curaçao. First, almost everybody went back to Holland, and from Holland they went to Curaçao, to New York, to Suriname, and other places.
I see René David. He's completely agreeing. So yeah, that's possible. Yeah.
Okay.
But I think there were also some families that had sort of gone there from Portugal before the Dutch, who had their sugar plantations. I'm thinking possibly the Saraiva de Mendonça, who sort of maintained friendly relations whilst the Dutch were there, and then when things turned, they became very patriotic towards Portugal as well. So I think there's sort of shades of grey. I mean, I think people are backing both horses here. Right. Yeah. That's very, very interesting. However, I'm not really into Curaçao, so I don't know a lot about Curaçao, to be honest. It's yeah.
There's a question from Roberta. Given that Oliver Cromwell began the process of readmitting Jews to England, did the Jewish support of the Orange family make continued Jewish immigration into England easier or not? I thought there was
That's a good question. It's also a good question. Yeah, we know about Manasseh ben Israel, always ideas and what he all tried in Holland to open England for Jews. And he definitely used also his power to meet the Orange family. There's even a source that shows that Manasseh ben Israel was standing during the opening of something with the Orange family and asked during that meeting also for the opening of Jews to England to write a petition. So no, there's definitely a correlation between the Orange family and the connection with Jews and the opening of England. Oh, definitely. They made a lot of profit out of that. Yeah.
But
definitely.
in 1656, when the Jews returned to England, there was no orange on the throne in Holland.
Definitely not. But it doesn't mean that you can't use that connection.
Okay.
That's
and of course, William III, Stadtholder of Holland and King of England, brought some Jews with him during the Glorious Revolution.
Co-King of England.
King of England, yeah.
Not in his own right, just with his wife. Very important. Very important. Were the Protestant Dutch in Pernambuco also sending sort of petitions back to the Netherlands?
That's definitely, yeah. And there is also research done to that. I have it's a PhD research also about these petitions to the Protestants. I can also put that in the chat, his PhD research. It's from 2014 or something. And he's writing about how the Protestants also indeed sent petitions, but it was mostly about food, sending food, because there was also a lot of hunger during that time. So they sent petitions that there needed to be food to the Dutch Brazil. Yeah. Also very interesting, by the way. But you can imagine that they use a narrative in their petitions than the Jews did.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Ali's, sorry.
Yes. No, okay, David, your turn.
Ali, it's nice to see you here. I'm not sure if you're on a train or somewhere. Ali says that I seem to remember seeing that Jewish colonists in Brazil went directly to Dutch Guyana, but he might be wrong. Do you know about that? As Suriname?
No, I'm sorry. I don't really know about. I know about New Amsterdam, about the petitions, but I don't know a lot about which direction they really fled.
He is on a train, yeah. Did the Portuguese have spies? I mean, do we know from the Portuguese archives if they knew what was going on? Again,
that I don't know. Maybe you guys know. I've never been really outside the Dutch archives. I use indeed the Inquisition. I've seen the Inquisition archives, but I never really used them for my research. So I can't answer that. Maybe somebody else who really visited those archives and really studied.
Yeah, both sides used spies, and in the West Indian Company's archives there are interrogations of Portuguese who were asked about Portuguese plans, campaigns, military information, etc. And it also went the other way. The Portuguese fought this liberation war, as they called it, and they made a lot of progress, and they made a lot of prisoners. They interrogated them as well. And you have to also remember that the population in that part of Brazil was 1/3 Portuguese, 1/3 Dutch, 1/3 Jews, almost equal.
Lobbying in company.
Yeah, so I will also send it in the chat. The PhD research, very interesting research.
A very obscure question, and I don't expect you to know the answer, but presumably Spain was still claiming ownership of Brazil at this point. Do we know what was going on there? I mean, presumably the Jews can't be appealing to Spain, but I mean, were they in any way a player in any of this?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. No. Maybe also you guys. I also played that question to you because I don't know.
No, because I know that this Sarajevo de Mendonça family, some of them became knights of the orders of the Calatravas, which of course requires you to produce some family tree saying you have no Jewish ancestry, and that's the Spanish order of chivalry. So I guess they were just trying to get themselves a new passport just in case things went bad.
Christopher asks about your reference to the decision by the directors of the WIC ordering tolerance in the colonies. Where did you find that? Was this from a secret meeting in 1629?
No, this is later. This is between the 30s and 40s, and it's really just resolutions in the National Archive. So if you search for Dutch resolutions, you'll find some resolutions that really provide tolerance in the colony.
And
multiple, by the way. It's not one. It's multiple resolutions that really mention like the tolerance for everybody with another religion.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So those orders were from the States General in Holland and not from the WIC.
No, it's from the States General indeed. Mm-hmm. States General who did this, yeah. It's also the WIC couldn't make any policy like, for example, freedom of conscience or something. That was really for the States General to say and not for the WIC.
Must have been complicated for those in Brazil to see who they would respond to the States General, to the WIC, to the governor of Brazil.
Yeah, but that's also today. Sometimes the bureaucracy is very difficult to understand where something has going to. So it was also that time. Some things were very bureaucratic. So to who do you send a petition? Yeah, there was also what you also see is sort of that's what I think is that also Jews sent multiple petitions to multiple people because they believed, we can better send it to a lot of people and hoping that one person answers that we all bet on one horse. So they just spread it a little, and that's why I also think 6 petitions to the States General, 1 petition to this, 1 petition is also a little to spread your chances. I also think you have to see it like that.
A question from Bruce again: is it possible to calculate the percentage of West Indies corporation revenues which were generated by Jews?
Yeah, also Wiesinger wrote about this again. He wrote a lot about Dutch Brazilian Jews. So he also wrote about how many people he thinks that were really involved in WIC during the establishment of the WIC, how many people put their money in. But I don't know completely how many percentage it is. He says 5% is around what you think the total income, how many people invested in it. But how that really was like divided, I don't know. I really don't know. So you can find that definitely somewhere in the literature.
You mentioned Ashkenazi Jews being in Pernambuco. Did they make any separate petitions, so independent of the ones we've discussed?
No. Also, the Ashkenazi Jews were just there was not a separately Ashkenazi community or something. They were living outside the Sephardic community. So you have to understand that they didn't organize themselves, those things. No.
Francis has a good question. Are there any diaries that describe how people felt about what was going on?
I love that question. Yeah, it's a very good question. Yes, there is, but only when Jews arrived in Amsterdam again. So like 10 years later, so what you mostly see in those refugee crises, that people afterwards write their story down, but we don't have it on the time itself. But yeah, there are definitely diaries afterwards that they are writing. Oh, we mentioned this, or we experienced this. Aboa, for example, I think he wrote also something about it. But yeah, no, not during itself that they thought, oh, we're going to write it down now. No, it was really afterwards that they tried. And what you see right then is that they try to give it a religious turn now, like, oh, we had to flee with the idea of God. So that's afterwards. You try a sort of giving a sort of message on what happened in your head.
There's one more question from Christopher. It's very specific. Hans, are you aware of the tolerance contained in the Treaty of Surrender of the Fort Cabedelo in 1635, written by Arcizewski?
I'm going to read that question. That's maybe easier. Hans, are you aware of the tolerance contained in the Treaty of Surrender of the Fort? No, Christopher, if you can send that to me, that would be great. I didn't read about it, but I'm very interested. I never read about that.
Great.
Yeah.
Any more questions on YouTube, David?
No, I'm sorry. I've rather sort of bombarded you for about half an hour. So.
It's fine. I see. Francis is. Can we see these diaries? Yes, definitely. But they're also just online. You can also find them online. So if you go in, for example, literature about the Jews, refugees from Dutch Brazil, search for Wiesnitzer. I can also write his name in the chat. He's also mentioning those diaries. Yeah.
Okay. I think that wraps it up.
I think so. It's an absolutely fascinating subject. I'm really glad you were able to speak to us about it.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for inviting me. Very good questions. A lot to think about again, and it's always good. So thank you all.
Thank you. Ton, would you like to?
Yes. Thank you, Hans, for giving a wonderful presentation and a lot of stuff to think about and to pursue in our further investigations. And thank you to our patrons who make all of this possible. So your support, we really appreciate this. And thank you to our viewers on Zoom. And we hope to see you next time. We're still thinking about a speaker next week, so we'll let you know during the week. And goodbye, everyone, and hope to see you next week.
Thank you, everyone.